Durant pull-up jumper off the rim and in! Oh! And the Thunder win!
Come on, let's sing the Thunder song.
Wait.
When you hear the sound of thunder, don't you get too scared. Just grab your thunder buddy and say these magic words.
Hello and welcome back to another special edition of the Thunder Buddies podcast. Throughout August, we've been doing a special series on new Thunder coach Billy Donovan. Part 1, childhood, was out a couple weeks ago. Then Darnell wrote about his playing days. Part 2. Part 3 came out yesterday, Sunday. It was, on his Wall Street stint, which turned into his early coaching career at Marshall in Kentucky. And then, parts 4 and 5 coming up are going to be on his building of a dynasty at Florida. It's been fun to research, fun to report. Darnell, we got 2 of these parts left. They're on Florida. As you look back on the series and look forward, what kind of still lingers with you as, an interesting thing that you found in your reporting?
Well, the Billy Donovan, the man, the person, is kind of what I found to be the most interesting as we were doing this. When he started, he was this driven, young, eager go-getter, and he's still that way to this day. He's got all of these high character traits, high-quality character traits that people praise and that you can see, that come through. And that hasn't really changed. And when we talk to people, we see that never changed from, when he started coaching to when he threw his national championships to NBA opportunities. He's still the same person now that he was, when he was sort of up and comer.
The only time the passion ever really kind of left him actually was, wrote about it yesterday, but Wall Street. He went for 4 months, and it was his playing days were done. He hadn't really thought about coaching yet, and he had this 4 or so month stint. And he was at this place where he probably, as far as he takes a grad assistant job at Kentucky, or does he stay on Wall Street and make the type of money he was making at Wall Street?
Yeah.
He chooses basketball just because he had no passion for it, and that just kind of shows how much he loves the game and how much it's shown. And then the other thing, just through the reporting, talking to everyone we've talked to through this, not one person has a bad word to say about him.
Not one.
And
it's
they're
incredible.
very willing to talk about him. Hey, I want to talk about Billy Donovan. And it's like, oh, yeah, Billy.
Yeah.
I'd love to.
Yeah, how much time you got?
Yeah, basically. I mean, that to me is reflective that what you hear about him, and you hear what a great guy he is. And, we've never really dealt with him until this year. He is because of all the people around him that you talk to and what they have to say.
Yeah.
That shows how genuine he is.
The other thing that stood out to me was, and this was in part of your part 3, that he got a chance to do so much stuff early on in his coaching career, and I think that really showed him a different way and different levels and a variety of different things that helped serve him as he went throughout his coaching career.
Rick Pitino's influence and really timing have directed him so much. He shows up in Providence, saves his college career, shows up in the NBA, gives him his only, a true NBA chance.
Right.
Then as he's figuring out what am I going to do with my life at Wall Street, Rick Pitino says, hey, I'm taking the Kentucky job. Want to come along? And then not only that, the fact that Rick Pitino then surrounded him at Providence with a great coaching staff, and then at Kentucky with a bunch of coaching mentors, including Tubby Smith.
And then let him actually go out there and do the job, do so many different things, and have so much responsibility. And I think that just allowed him to grow and become this hot shot of a young coach as he started his coaching career and elevated to a national championship winning coach.
No doubt about it. As we get now into the, I would say probably 30 or so minute soundbite of the end of our interview with Billy Donovan, he's going to talk about what we just talked about, and then into his Florida days, building the dynasty at Florida, and then life after the championship, which, he's like a philosopher when we started asking about life after the title. You're going to have to sift through some deep thinking Billy Donovan, but
Deep thoughts with Billy Donovan.
Yeah, there are a few
Yeah.
towards the end of this interview, but in general it's good stuff, and I think it's good for the fans to hear their new coach. Here he is. I want to talk a little about Wall Street. It's 3 months, is that right?
Maybe it was maybe a little bit longer than that.
Everyone I talked to was just talked about how unhappy you were in that situation. What was your day-to-day job there, and were you trying to get out of it every day, or just?
I think one is, I never forget, my high school backed up to the train station. The train station ran into Penn Station in Madison Square Garden, where most of these guys would work down on Wall Street or wherever in Manhattan. And I always remember getting dropped off at school, getting to school, and I always look up there, and it'd be like winter, it'd be February, these guys would be sitting up on the platform, and they just look miserable. No one looked happy. I'm like, I don't want to do that. So, just kind of like abruptly your career ends. Like, I gave it a shot. I'm in the CBA, a couple training camps, but like I realize at best I'm going to be a 11th or 12th guy waving a towel at the end of the bench, a good guy to have on the team, but I'm not going to get in there. And so I said, okay, do I stay and just try to keep chasing this thing and, living in Rapid City, South Dakota, and living in Casper, Wyoming, and doing that and becoming, 28, 29 years old and trying to get a job, or do I start now? And I said, something, I did everything I can do. I think it's time to move on. So like it abruptly kind of stops. I'm like, okay, what am I going to do now? So there were some people that had talked to me about going back up to Providence in New England and doing some different stuff, maybe doing some TV or radio from Providence. And then, people tell me, listen, go down to Wall Street. You do great at Wall Street. A lot of former athletes go down there and careers are over with. You'll do great, da-da-da-da. So I really had never been exposed to that kind of life of any of that. So a guy, when I was playing for the Knicks for that short period of time, this guy's son was a ball boy there, and when he found out that I wasn't playing anymore, he reached out and called me. And he's like, listen, I'm starting a brokerage firm. I'd love to have you join me. You need to get your Series 7. You need to do this, this, and this. Do you want to do it? I'm like, yeah, sure. I don't know. I'll try it. So they pay for me to get the Series 7, so I'm sitting in this room. It's like this big. There's just desks against the walls, and I'm having to study for this Series 7 exam. I'm having to go to these night classes, and I'm working downtown on Wall Street, and from 7 o'clock in the morning till 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they have me cold calling, and they give me these stack of cards. Joe Smith, this company on whatever it is, from Dallas, Texas, and I'm trying to get this guy on the phone, and I'm like, okay, I'm pushing what stock, and what does this stock do, and why is this thing going to do well? And I'm like, okay, I'm asking this guy for money. First of all, I really don't even know what, I'm just hoping that what they're telling me about this stock being good is good. And it's just, so I ended up passing my Series 7. And I'm like, I cannot see myself doing this the rest of my life. There's no way. And I think the more I was away from the game, I never ever really thought about coaching at all. And that was probably the first time going through it. I thought about coaching. And Pitino was still working for the Knicks, and they had a game one night, and I met with him after the game, and he told me I'm crazy, told me to stay down at Wall Street. You don't want to coach, you don't want to do this. And I'm like, listen, I'm not doing this. I don't like this. And then he kind of opened up to me and told me that he was in the middle of dealing with Kentucky, and that he may go. And he asked me if I wanted to go with him, but he couldn't give me a job. I had to start off as a graduate assistant and go to grad school. So I didn't hardly made any money, and I was married that August, and then right after we got back from our honeymoon, I drove to Lexington and I started.
Yeah, it's just Kevin said it was you passed your Series 7 and quit the next day. Probably wasn't that close.
That was
right?
that close. Yeah. Because Kevin was down there, and Kevin and I were close. And what Kevin did is Kevin played at Pace, which is Division II school, and he worked at Bear Stearns. So he'd kind of been exposed to this, and he would work all the time during the summertime. I talked to him a little bit about it, and he seemed happy, and he loved it, and all that stuff. So I'm like, it wasn't that. What drove me nuts was the cold calling, and the thing that amazed me is every time I came in the office, all I ever wanted to do was talk about sports. Everyone wanted to talk about sports. And I'm like, I don't know. It was just all about making money and just money, and you got to make money for the firm, make money, and and I just it just wasn't for me at all. So Kevin probably was exaggerating a little bit the next day. I would say it probably, for me, it probably like I maybe started to look into it maybe in, I don't know, probably finished like right around January 1st, and I would probably say by like May 1 I was done.
Kentucky, those early years at Kentucky, just what did Rick do that that still stuck with you? I've heard, talking to Travis Ford, he said you did every single scouting report, which he says, well, I split my scouting reports between the 3 assistants. Just what did you learn in those early years?
Well, the one thing it's kind of like almost like I talked about my childhood growing up there, going into these environments there and getting the chance to exceed. Like the one thing I always appreciate with Coach Pitino for me was like he exposed me to everything. I got a chance to get exposed to everything at a really, really young age. From on the phone recruiting to scouting to having to go travel to almost do like advanced scouting, to player development on the court, to film breakdown, to dealing with media for him sometimes, and like he exposed me and put me in these situations, and it was very, very challenging. He was very, very demanding, and but I learned a lot and I grew a lot, and I've always said this, like I've been playing wise. Stu Jackson's an assistant coach at Providence. Herb Sendek, who's at Arizona State, was at that time this past year, was on staff. Gordy Chiesa, who worked for Utah for a long time. Then you had Jeff Van Gundy. That was the staff I played for, And then you go to Kentucky, and it's Rick Pitino, and it's Tubby Smith, and it's Herb Sendek, and it's Ralph Willard, and just got exposed to all these people. So I was around a lot of good people. And the one thing I always remember is not only Coach Pitino exposing to me to all this, but I had these guys that were around me that really, really, really were very patient, and they took time to help me grow and develop, And I always will be, I'm always grateful for that, because I was just around, like, just some incredible coaches and some incredible people.
Why Marshall? How did that come about? What did you learn from that, 18 months or so? I know 2 years.
It was about 2 hours from Lexington. It was in a conference where, the big thing back then, I think, was when you were looking at jobs, the biggest thing was when you were taking a job with these one-bid leagues, is you wanted to be in a situation where you felt like that job in that school had a legitimate chance to make it to the tournament. And Marshall at that time was in the Southern Conference, so Tennessee, Chattanooga, and Marshall. Bob McKillop had just gotten to Davidson there a couple of years before I got there. But it was a good, it was a really, really good job. It had good fan support. It was in a league that you could win. I thought it was in a really, really good recruiting area in terms of Kentucky and Ohio. You could even get into North Carolina some. So, they had called up, and there was some people that were really, really that knew me a little bit from Kentucky, that were there living in West Virginia and living in Ashland, Kentucky, and went there and visited, and really, really liked the potential of it, and decided to do it.
Was Jason Williams already there? Did you bring him there?
I recruited Jason.
So you your first big recruit as a head coach?
Well, at that time it was funny because I recruited Jason when he was at Kentucky, and we had lost Travis Ford at that time. And I forget who was coming out. It may have been Jason Kidd was coming out that year. I forget who else was maybe coming out right around that time. But Coach Pitino felt like we needed a guy that could come in and impact right away. And Jason came to our camp in Kentucky, and I loved Jason. He was a basketball gym rat and just loved playing. And, we kind of passed on him, and I always kept in touch with Jason. And then when I got the job, Jason had made a decision to go to Providence. And he got out of his letter and he went up to a prep school, and then I started recruiting him, and because of the relationship we had developed, he ended up signing with Marshall, and then I coached him for that 1 year, and then I left. And then he wanted to come to Florida. So I told him, I said, listen, you can't come to Florida. You're 30 miles up the road here. You're like an icon. You need to stay right here. And you play with Randy Moss and all that stuff. Yep. So there was a big, those two guys were like sports heroes in West Virginia. And he's like, nope, I'm leaving, I'm coming. And that's what he did. So he was with me for a year, and then we had to move him on.
Then you go to Florida. Just how much different was your 2001, 2002 Billy Donovan to 2012 Billy Donovan as a young coach at Florida, trying to build that program up? Just what do you kind of remember about those days?
Well, I mean, I got there, so it was in 1996, I think I got there, so I was 29 years old maybe? I think 29 years old.
Yeah.
One, I'd been in the league, just being in Kentucky, so I knew the league pretty well, so I felt pretty comfortable with that. I think because I was at Kentucky, there was probably some contacts and relationships that were able to be built because we were recruiting nationally. But I also knew we were starting from ground zero. But I really felt like from the beginning, meeting with the AD for the first time, I felt like he and I were pretty well connected and kind of shared a common and same vision about what the program both of us thought it could be. And I think at the time, Norm Sloan, Lon Kruger, they'd had success there. But nothing had been sustained for any long length of period of time. Lon took over a really, really hard situation. And he really cleaned up the program and restored the integrity of the program. And then all of a sudden builds it up, gets to the Final Four, stays 1 year and goes to Illinois. So the biggest thing with the AD and talking to him was like, could we sustain something over a period of time that really had never been done before? And he believed it could be done. And Anthony Grant at that time was on my staff. He's a Miami guy, so he knew the state of Florida very, very well. John Pelfrey just finished up playing. He had a national name, playing in Kentucky. And, I just kind of believed in what the AD was talking about, and kind of I felt like it could be a really good situation. But I also knew we were starting at rock bottom and we were going to have to build it up.
You got a lot of good big recruits in those early years, Mike Miller, David Lees, but you also kind of took some criticism because you were the up-and-comer who was, stealing this guy from Roy Williams, stealing that. Was that tough, or was that just kind of part of making a name for yourself?
You know what? One of the things I think I learned and I found out going through it was the first thing was I was always amazed when I was at Kentucky. At that time it was like Kentucky with Rick Pitino, you had Indiana with Bobby Knight, you had Georgetown with John Thompson, you had North Carolina with Dean Smith, Roy Williams was at Kansas at the time. There was only like 6 or 7 like programs, and I'll never forget like when I was recruiting at Kentucky, like there'd be times I'd go in and start recruiting, and there'd be schools they just give up. They would just give up. They wouldn't even try. And a lot of times, most of the recruiting battles when I was an assistant coach at Kentucky were with Georgetown and with North Carolina and with Indiana, Kansas. Like it was like those 6 or 8 programs were all vying for the same guys. So, you would never really compare. And I always said, something like, if I ever get a job, like I'm going to go after the guys I want to recruit. And I think probably in a lot of ways I upset the apple cart. And it was probably a different way of some things that maybe some of those guys were used to. And I took a lot of flack over that, but the thing that bothered me was that I think that this perception was that maybe in some way I wasn't doing things the right way, and that was not the case. That's what bothered me, and I think that coaches stirring that up and creating that and not being true, that was bothered me more than anything else. And I always said, if I was in the profession long enough, and if there was a young guy coming up and maybe there was a perception, I was going to always go try to talk to the guy and speak to him. But, through that experience, Roy and I have developed a really, really good relationship through that, in a lot of ways. And, just even with the USA Basketball and him being on the selection committee and all those kind of things, it's actually a lot of good things have happened from it. At the time when you're 32 years old and you're kind of coming up, it was just one of those things where, like I built some relationships with some kids and some people that were around a lot of these kids, and I think in a lot of ways people were like, "There's no way that guy's going to Florida," and they did.
Yeah. Has there been that younger coach now that you were later in your career that you did, you were mentioning you'd go up and talk to them?
Well, I'm just saying, I think what happened was back then there was so much like,
just because it was
like let's turn them into the NCAA, or let's do this, let's do that. And I was just like, okay, like first of all, like I don't really know a lot of these coaches in terms of the older guys that were there. But no, I don't think there's like anybody. Like I've had, it's been interesting. I think I've had coaches come to me as I've gotten older to want to talk about, you know, different kind of situations that they've gotten into, which I've appreciated. But I don't know if there's one coach out there that I would say is that you know, I've gone up to and talked to because I felt like there was a problem. No.
Who were some of maybe the recruits you remember, the players, the Mike Millers, that really you thought was like the turning point type?
I'm sorry?
Just the program building turning point type recruits, players, you know, in those early years.
Well, I
really
felt,
changed things.
Yeah, I just felt like for us, the first thing we needed to do was we needed to recruit the state of Florida. I think you always have to protect your backyard, so we needed to recruit the state of Florida. So, you know, at that time you had Haslam was coming out, Brent Wright was coming out, Major Parker. So Anthony Grant did a great job recruiting those guys. And then Teddy Dupay was a kid that was a kid from Fort Myers, Cape Coral area, he was a McDonald American, he was a point guard, a good player. But I think people were able to make sense of those guys. But once Mike Miller came, I thought that changed a lot for us. And I'll always be grateful to him because he came at a time where it didn't make sense to come. And he really carved in a lot of ways. Like he made a comment to me that when he went to college, what he wanted to do was he wanted to put his footprints into a program. And I think his legacy is still there because of the decision he made. And that's not taking anything away from the in-state guys, because those guys were great too. But it allowed us to have a national presence. Because
he was like top 5, top 10, South Dakota.
It allowed us to have a national presence, which helped us recruit nationally, you know, and it gave us credibility. And then after his sophomore year, you know, we played for a national championship, and he goes pro, and a lot of good things from then, you know, happened after that.
Yeah. Those years, though, you had a lot of good teams, but the early exits for a while. How tough were those years having those exits, and then how sweet was reaching the pinnacle in 06, I believe?
Yeah, you know what was interesting is you when you're going through that, I had some talented guys, I had some good players, but you try to get this team to be a cohesive, to get them to be a team, and that's actually when my relationship with Bill
Belichick
took off, because what happened was after a couple early exits, they had won maybe 3 out of 5 Super Bowls. Best man at my wedding works for Johnston's Ring Company, and he does a lot of rings for sports teams that win championships. So he told me, he said, hey, you know, I was with Robert Kraft and Belichick. I said, boy, I'd love to sit down with that guy and just pick his brain, spend some time with him. So unbeknownst to me, my buddy just said, hey, yeah. He said, sure, give me a call. Here's my number. And I called him and I was speaking to him, you know, and to your point, you know, you're having some of these early exits and you're trying to figure out why, and it was really refreshing to me because I felt like a lot of the things that he and I were talking about, we were trying to do, and we were on the right path and the right course, but we were having it was a challenge to get some of these, you know, players, to get them really, really focused on maybe more would be less, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I felt like we were on the right course, even with those early exits. I really felt that way. And then obviously, as you mentioned, you know, getting with when those guys were freshmen, Horford, Noah, and Brewer, and to be honest with you, some of those guys, those guys coming in did not have the cachet coming out of high school that some other guys had. I mean, Noah and Horford, I mean, those guys weren't even top like 50 guys in the country coming out of high school. And they obviously evolved and developed and grew. But Corey was the only, I think, McDonald American on the entire team. But those guys really became a team, which made it really special.
Yeah.
Did you feel validation, some sort of different validation after the championship than before?
You know what I learned about, too, is it was really interesting. There's been a lot of things that have been interesting in my life, but, you know, we're all chasing the same thing, and in some way you think if you get that thing that you're all chasing, that in some way, to your point, you personally are going to feel validated, or you're going to feel better about yourself, or your self-esteem or your image of yourself is going to improve. And it may have been the most empty feeling I ever had, because and I talk to coaches about this all the time, that sit there and are chasing this thing. And there's nothing wrong with chasing it, it's great. But if you're chasing it at the expense that you're losing who you are as a human being and as a person, it can eat you up and destroy you. And I think I was as driven, as motivated as anybody. But when it happened, not only once but twice, like, I realized that I had kind of hook, line, and sinker chewed into something that, like, really, like, outside of someone saying, well, he won a national championship, it didn't change my life. And it made me realize in a lot of ways, like, wait, what's this all about now? Because if this happens to you, like it happened for me in college twice, so you'd have to say, if I was the coach for 40 years, winning 2 national championships, that's a lot, you know. So, okay, so what do the other years mean? Like, where's the purpose behind it? Like, what is my goal? What's my mission? Who am I as a coach? Who am I as a person? Like, where am I going? What am I doing? What do I stand for as a father, as a husband? What do I stand for as a coach? Who do I want to be, you know? Is it all just about, like, okay, here rests a man that won this many games, and lost. Here's a man who's got this many trophies, and I'm just sitting there saying, like, okay, and you know, when I've kind of thought about it, it gave me more clarity in terms of purpose in my life. And I'm happy that it happened to me in my early 40s, because there's probably a lot of guys that are living right now that are finished up their coaching career, maybe from a self-esteem, ego standpoint, don't feel great about themselves because, quote-unquote, they didn't win it all. And I feel bad when people get to that point, because it doesn't. I think John Wooden made a great comment. I think it was him. To all my friends, I wish a national championship, and I do the same to all my enemies. Because it changes your life, but it changes your life in a different way, that you start to sit there and you actually have to look in the mirror and say, you know what, I had life all wrong. Mm-hmm. That was the hardest part. That was the most humbling part.
You feel like you had it wrong before the championships?
Mm-hmm.
How did it change after?
I think it gives you perspective and clarity that, you know what, there's nothing wrong. Like, when you're chasing something, the chase turns you into something. And if you're not careful of what that chase is turning you into, it can become very, very destructive to yourself, to your family, to the people around you. But if you can chase something, and that chase can build perseverance and resiliency, and it can build better relationships, and it can build an understanding of what the process is, and to chase it. But when you're chasing something, you're always evolving into something. You're always, like, you're changing too. And I was chasing something probably in part for the wrong reasons, in some parts for the right reasons. But when you get there, society deems that, like, okay, you're a success now.
Right.
But before that happened, you're not. And I think what ends up happening is a lot of people live life like that, and you lose yourself. You know, what is it for a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? Like, you lose yourself in it. And if you're not careful, and you don't go, if you're not careful, you can look back over your life, and there can be a lot of dead bodies on the road. From your children to your family to your friends to players, relationships, whatever it could be, because you just get so tunnel vision. I have to do this because this is going to complete me, because once I get this, I'm going to be so much better. I'm going to feel so much better about myself, and everybody else is going to feel so much better about me. And, you know, that chase is awesome. It's great, but, like, it's not. You're turning into something, you know. And I think that's the thing that I realized was there was times I was chasing things that I wasn't happy who I was turning into.
After the second championship in 2007, I think it was, what became your drive? What was your focus? What became your chase?
Well, I think the chase was still to try to chase championships. That hadn't changed. But my purpose really was to try to teach guys and help guys understand, like, when you're a part of something bigger than yourself, and you're actually playing for the man standing next to you, and you have these relationships that get built over a period of time, that you can actually sit down 15, 20, 30 years later and obviously always be connected the rest of your life because of the struggle that you go through and how you help each other grow. And I felt like my purpose at that time was to really teach these guys what goes into winning and what it takes to be a team. And to the point we were talking earlier, you get all of a sudden you get eliminated during the NCAA tournament for 3, 4, 5 years. You're searching and figuring stuff out, and you go sit there and you talk to Belichick for one night for 5 hours, and you're talking all this coaching stuff and everything else, and you're like, wow, okay, like I feel like I'm, moving in the right direction in terms of what you're doing, but trying to get these guys to understand what goes into winning, what goes into success, what is it to be a really good teammate, what it is to build those kind of relationships, can you actually, people don't realize this, but the Greek word for competition is to struggle together. Can we struggle together as friends and brothers and, just have this incredible connection and bond? And that's what I've always loved about. So trying to create that and get those guys to see that they're a part of something bigger than themselves and they can't achieve it without the guys they have next to them, and trying to get them to see it. And some guys, are bought in, some guys aren't bought into it. Some guys, they're in a position where it can become about me. Teams, me, what do I want? And I don't think there's anything for me, as I work, there's nothing greater when you're pulling a group of people together and there's an enormous amount of love and care and affection and acceptance of each other for who you are, where you can actually be yourself and be who you are. Like those are the things I've kind of learned. So it became less about, okay, I need to do this to validate myself as much as, okay, like what it validated to me was, as a coach, I was on the right path. Even though I went through those struggles there, I was on the right path in terms of what that looked like or what it needed to be to try to get to that part. And that's the hard part when you're going through it. It's like, okay, am I on the right path? Or am I like on a different planet? Like, are the things we're preaching and coaching and talking and working on every single day, are these things leading to us being the best we can be? I think you always have to take inventory of what direction are you going in, because we're always going in a direction, but we may not know what direction we're going.
Right. How much of what we're talking about is a result of you going to Orlando and taking that job after that second championship? Did that have something to do with it? You felt like maybe you did accomplish what you set out to accomplish and you were ready for a next goal? Or just, what was that about?
Going back out of Orlando?
No, going to Orlando. Taking the job.
Why did I?
Yeah.
I think I always had been intrigued, with the NBA. I've always been intrigued about, just basketball all day long. The fact, I think, geographically, it was an easy transition for my family. It was 2 hours away. And I think, a young team, Dwight was there. But, it just, I don't know if it was more ego for me at that time, being 42 years old, 41, or just like, hey, the challenge. When I say ego, not like, hey, I'm an NBA coach, but the challenge, that kind of stuff, I don't really remember. But I do remember going through that experience. I felt like I was leaving Florida short. And I felt like when I had talked to the athletic director, I had talked about trying to, sustain something over a long period of time. And I was there for 11 years, that's a long time, but I felt like I didn't see my job through. And what I mean by that is, here we coming off of 2 national championships. I don't know what this could turn into. Like, what can Florida turn into from this, being able to capitalize off some of that stuff. And then, kind of going through it, I felt like the last 8 years, I know that I gave everything I had to Florida, and all that I could do, I felt like I had finally, I was at peace finally at that point that, my work is done here. And I think that's part of the reason why I went back like I did and put them in a very, very difficult situation. But the going part was, even talking to people, Billy, there's nothing more you can do there. You've won 2 national championships. And that's that whole part of, like, people a lot of times defining, you've done all you can do, it's time to move on. But in my heart, I hadn't felt that way, and that's maybe the battle that I went through of, staying going, what I should do there.
What was tougher, leaving Florida to go to Orlando, or telling Orlando you had to leave them and you want to go back to Florida?
Well, it happened so quickly, it almost felt like I never left Florida. But I really felt, because Bob Vanderwide and Alex Martins and the DeVos family were like nothing but first class and great to me. But I also knew, like, in my heart, they were not gonna. I just in my heart, and I just felt like I could have faked it or just kind of gone through there and said, okay, whether this works out, doesn't work out, I'll just try to bounce back on my feet somewhere else. And I didn't think that was fair to Orlando. I didn't feel like that was fair to them. And obviously I put them in a hard spot. And I was just happy that Stan went there, because obviously he did a great job. They got a great coach, and they had a lot of success, during Stan's tenure. So I felt better about that. And I got a chance, just being in state, to follow it pretty closely. And I was happy that it worked out well. But I think I put them in a very, very difficult situation. And I didn't want to do that. But I also felt like I'd made a mistake, and I felt like not saying anything and not stepping up and saying, listen, this needs to get corrected, would have been a mistake, because I didn't think it was fair to maybe, do that to that organization, knowing how I felt in my heart.
Yeah, well, we talked a little bit about the community down in Orlando. How much of, when you say you felt like you had unfinished business in Florida, how much of the community aspect do you feel like that was not just the basketball and the program, but you immersed yourself in that community, you and your family?
Yeah, my wife and I have tried to, we tried to help with the Catholic high school to help. There was a lot of people that were involved in helping that. I tried to do some different things in the community. And when I say that there was unfinished business to do, it had nothing to do with my unfinished business. It was more of the fact that myself, the AD, the two presidents that were there, the coaches, all the people that worked so hard, it's 2 national championships, and now we're losing everybody. Everybody's lost. Noah, Horford, they're all gone. Okay, so now I'm not seeing through what could happen, like what could happen to Florida's program. And by me leaving, we'll never find that out. And for some reason, after I made the decision, that revelation hit me, and it hurt, because I felt like, I can't do this. This there's more for me to do here. There's more for me to see through. And I think that was probably, I felt like I didn't see, maybe not unfinished business, I needed to see this further through. And I think seeing through some of that further through was probably too in the community as well. You know what I mean? Is I think, was to try to, I've always tried to be involved and trying to help out, when people have asked me to help out on different things, if schedule and time permits.
Can I go back to Providence for a moment? You said, who was the guy that told you if the coach thought you could play or thought you could help?
I forget who it was. We were sitting there, I was just talking, talking about, I forget who it was, but it was a comment was like, we're not very good right now, and you're not playing. Don't you think he would have played you if he thought you thought you're any good? And, it was, I think the one thing I always really respected and appreciated about my parents, and especially my dad, is he always, I don't want to say that he let me fail, but he never treated me like I was like the best thing since sliced bread, and I always had to struggle and go through adversity and difficulties, and figure it out. Now he was there, he helped me, try to guide me through some of those things, but I think a lot of times when you're young, it's so easy to deflect. It's not me, it's him. Why? And it was probably the first time, I don't want to say the first time in life, but it was the first time being in college and being on my own that I actually had to look in the mirror and say, that guy's right. If I was good enough, I would be out there playing. And that says something about me as a player. So what am I going to do? Am I going to transfer and go somewhere else, which is fine? Or am I going to see this through in terms of how good can I be and how much can I help the team? Because right now I'm not making enough of an impact to help the team that he's not playing me, because I got to believe the head coach wants to win. And I think that really shifted even my commitment to the game even to a different level. I think for my age, being in 9th, 10th grade, but when I started to get to sophomore, junior year, I think it even went to a different level in terms of commitment standpoint. And I learned a lot through the struggles. That's the one thing I'd say in my life is I've learned a lot through the difficulties, which I appreciate. I think a lot of times parents always try to protect their kids from going through any difficulties because they don't want to see their kids suffer. And not to say that my parents wanted me to go through difficulties, but I think them guiding me and having me persevere or deal with the adversity, I think in a lot of ways it helped me grow.
The difficulties you faced those first 2 years of college, how did that help shape you as a player going forward?
Well, I think you have to learn, first of all, in the game of basketball, or probably anything in life, people can like what the game brings to them. Fame, money, recognition, whatever the thing are, based on what level of player you are. But when adversity really, really hits, okay, like if the adversity's up here and I've got to overcome the adversity, as you start to go through that, a lot of times, you know what, this ain't worth it. Then you find out, like, this is not as important as you said it was. And I always use this analogy, like, I'd want to go to the moon. I'd love to go to the moon someday, too. But I'm not so sure I'm committed to being an astronaut. So what happens is I think that adversity I think the adversity gives you a measuring stick of how actually important what you say you want to do is. And I wanted to play at Providence, and I wanted to overcome that, and I wanted to get on the floor, and I wanted to play. And I was committed to working through that, where, it could have been, I'll just go transfer down here, it'll be easier. And I could have done that. But I said, you know what, no, this is what I wanted to do. And I feel like that adversity stuff always helped me question what I was saying in terms of, we all can be hypocritical in our own lives, saying one thing and doing another. Well, I'm talking about I want to play and do this stuff, but am I willing to put forth the work that was going to be necessary for me to go out there and play? And if I wasn't, then I need to readjust my goals or readjust what I say, because I'm saying I want to play, but I'm not willing to do this. That doesn't make any sense. And there's certain things I think you have to do, and I think the adversity is a great measuring stick of showing you how important is this to you.
And you gained weight those first 2 years?
Yeah, that was part of the problem too. I didn't take care of myself. We didn't really have like the nutrition stuff like they have here right now. But yeah, I probably got up to the high 180s, low 190s, and probably my junior year I probably played around 170. So I probably dropped about 22, 23 pounds. I took better care of myself. I got in better shape. I made a much, much bigger commitment than I had. I was a pretty good commitment, but it wasn't like a serious commitment like it needed to be. Mm-hmm. And in reality, you looking dead smack in the mirror and you're realizing, okay, well, I'm 20 pounds overweight, and I'm making all these excuses, and the reality is it's me.
What did you think of the name Billy the Kid?
Well, at that time when you're 20 years old, 19 years old, it's kind of corny. Dressed up in cowboy outfits. I really didn't want to do it, but I didn't have really a choice. But Coach Pitino, I probably had to do something. It probably gave me confidence, self-esteem, some of that stuff. He always, he was really good with that stuff. But I was okay with the nickname. I can't tell you I was okay with getting dressed up in a cowboy outfit.
Forget that. Your memories of being drafted obviously was way different in '80, whatever that was, as it is now. So what are your memories of that day?
I was really, really humbled in a great way. Back then, I think the Chicago pre-draft camp. Back then, there was a pre-draft camp in Hawaii and Portsmouth were like the two biggest things, and I'll never forget this. Pretty good, coming off the Final Four, we're okay here. I didn't know where I was going to get drafted. I knew I wasn't going in the first round, but I think maybe going in the second round, I don't know. And all of a sudden, I'm watching this guy play in Hawaii. I'm like, who is this guy? And I'm like, 6'7", 6'8", and I'm like, gosh, that's Scottie Pippen from Central Arkansas State. I'm like, who? Never heard of this guy. And who's this guard? It was Kevin Johnson. And I realized how many good players there were out there. Because growing up in the Northeast, I just thought, hey, it's the Big East. There's nothing compared to that. Maybe the ACC a little bit back then, but it's the Big East. And I went through that, and I was like, wow, okay, there's some guys in this thing right now that are on a way different level athletically and a way different level talent-wise. And I in those lead up pre-draft things, just going like it was, I was just okay. I didn't play great, and probably those pre-draft things, Portsmouth, the other thing, I probably was hurt in those things because I didn't play well, and I knew that I was going to get drafted, but I was on a point too where I knew the reality was I was going to have to get drafted by the right team to really be able to make it, and that was it. So I didn't even, back then they had like the first round, and then like you found out by like the radio, and I think someone from Utah had called me and said they took me in the third round, and it was great. And, the crazy story about Utah, no one, maybe people know this. Frank Layden coached my dad and taught my mom and my dad in high school. And Frank Layden taught and coached the same high school I played at. So it was just kind of this crazy story, But I felt like I said, I felt like I had a chance, but I knew just going to some of those because back then it wasn't like it is now where like the agents hold out like their best guys. Like back then everybody was playing. Right? Everybody was in there playing. And I mean, Mosey Bogues is in there, and Pippen's in there, and Kevin Johnson's in there. I mean, there was some really, really, really good players there, really good players. And I could see, just like wow.
What do you remember about the Knicks just coming out?
Oh, I mean, the funniest thing was, well, first of all, growing up, I never forget this. I tell the story several times. So there was a sporting goods store, and back when I was growing up, it was Frazier and Monroe in the backcourt, and I loved those two guys, and I loved Walt Frazier. So they had these shirts that were like a headshot of Walt Frazier and then like an action shot shirt, right? So I wanted to get this, so I get this shirt. I must be like, seriously, 8 years old, 7 years old. And I said to my mother, I said, do you think Walt Frazier will still be playing when I'm playing for the Knicks? My mom's like, I don't think so, And just the first time being baby, I grew up jumping on Long Island Railroad, buying a $5 ticket up in the rafters and going and trying to find a closest seat to the court, going to games with my buddies. I was living at home with my parents because I didn't really have a place to stay. Couldn't afford to live in New York, so I'm out there on Long Island. So after the games were over, they used to take the Long Island Railroad back with my buddies. I used to take the train, into the games and stuff like that. And for that time was just an incredible opportunity, and I think because Mark was taken in the first round and they needed a backup, I think Pitino felt, okay, he knows my system, he knows my style, he can back up Mark. But probably as he realized, at best, I probably wasn't maybe quite even good enough to be a backup.
But you were satisfied with your career, right?
Very much so.
You felt like you got everything you could out of your abilities.
That's the thing that gives me comfort and peace, and I'm fine with that. I don't feel like in any way wish I would have worked harder, wish I would have played for a better coach, wish I would have went to a better place, wish I was drafted by a different team. I don't, I really feel like all the different circumstances that were thrown at me, I felt like I did my part in terms of overcoming them, but I also understand there's a lot of things that ended up happening that I had no control over that were really a blessing. Going to Providence maybe instead of Seton Hall, going to Providence instead of taking a Division II offer, not transferring out of Providence and staying, Rick Pitino coming in. So you have to take, there's a lot of positive things happen that I had no control over, and I think it was a good lesson for me that in life you have to focus on actually the stuff that you can control. And a lot of times the things you can control are, your work ethic and your attitude and your commitment to what you're doing. And some of this other stuff's out of your control. And you do the best that you can with the hand that's been dealt to you. And I felt like I did that. I wasn't this 6'4", big, strong, physical guard that could defend, was athletic and, deep range. It wasn't. At best I was a good, at best I was maybe a solid backup point guard. At best.
Durant, pull-up jumper, off the rim, and the Thunder win! All right, come on, let's sing the Thunder song.
When you hear the sound of thunder, don't you get too scared. Just grab your thunder buddy and say these magic words.